Hello and welcome to India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. Inflows into equity mutual funds soar 81% in July, hitting a record high of 42,700 crore rupees. New fund offerings mop up more than 30,000 crores. SIP inflows crossed 28,000 crores. Block deals continue on Dalal Street. Private equity giant Warburg exits Home First Finance, raking in 1,200 crore rupees. Promoters and PEs have sold shares worth $2 billion just in the last 4 months. RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra says minimum balance for a savings account is not under regulatory domain. This after ICICI Bank hikes minimum balance from 10,000 rupees to 50,000 rupees. Sources say less than 10% of accounts across ICICI Bank's portfolio will be impacted by the move. Top government officials briefed the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs on US doubling tariffs on India to 50%. The Indian ambassador to the US attempts an outreach with Republicans as he speaks to senior Senator Lindsey Graham. All eyes now on the Trump-Putin summit scheduled for the 15th of August. US and China yet to announce an extension of their tariff deadline as the fragile truce deal expires on the 12th of August. Beijing had struck an optimistic note on a potential extension. US officials say the ball is now in President Trump's court. In an unprecedented arrangement, semiconductor maker Nvidia and AMD agreed to pay the US government a portion of their revenue from China in exchange for export licenses. Both companies will pay the US government 15% of revenue from the sale of their artificial intelligence chips in China. Onion exporters meet Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal after losing global clients following India's export ban, which was lifted in May last year. Exporters say China and Pakistan have increased their global market share, while India's onion exports continue to decline. Air India confirms 194 families of the Ahmedabad crash victims have received interim compensation of 25 lakh rupees. A US law firm will represent 70 families as it aims to pursue legal claims in the US and UK under the Montreal Convention. 241 people died on board the London-bound flight and at least 19 people died on the ground. Delhi police briefly detained opposition leaders including Rahul Gandhi and Akhilesh Yadav as they lead a protest march to the Election Commission, oppose the voter roll division in Bihar and allege other electoral malpractices. BJP slams the protest, accuses the opposition of trying to create a state of anarchy. The External Affairs Ministry reacts sharply to remarks made by Pakistan's army chief in Florida, calls it nuclear sabre-rattling, asserts India will not give in to threats. New Delhi says the remarks reinforce doubts about Pakistan's nuclear command. 5 Al Jazeera staff among 7 killed in an Israeli strike on a tent housing journalists in Gaza. This includes 28-year-old journalist Anas al-Sharif, who had been reporting extensively on the war. Tel Aviv claims he worked for Hamas. Al Jazeera calls it another blatant and premeditated attack on the press. The Supreme Court orders the rounding up of all stray dogs in the National Capital Region and move them to shelters within 8 weeks, calls the current situation grim and wants Delhi to be stray dog free, refuses to hear any pleas by animal rights activists, saying there is no room for sentiment. Well, let's start with the day's market action. Dalal Street started the week on a positive note, led by PSU banks and defense stocks. In fact, the Nifty ending above the 24,500 mark, a gain of about 220 points there for the Nifty. The Sensex up 746, 500-point move up on the Bank Nifty, and the mid-caps up by almost 500 points as well. So strong start to our markets today. And the big story from the markets, investments into equity mutual funds surging 81% to a record high of over 42,000 crore rupees in July. New fund offers collected over 30,000 crore rupees in the month. Mutual fund data also shows that investors continue to prefer mid and small caps over large caps. Surbi standing by with the data breakup. Surbi, a record month.
The inflows for equity mutual funds have hit a record high, the highest ever level. The net equity inflow in this month of July has been 42,672 crores. That's a huge number, and it has overtaken the previous high, which was last year in Diwali, around October, which was around 41,000 crores. So where does all this money come in from? New fund offerings. Over 30 NFOs, and all put together, they have pulled in over 30,400 crores. That's the might of these NFOs. So you'd wonder, what are these new funds? Well, they're across categories. There are lots of thematic funds that have pulled in the money. In fact, 9,000 crores has come in from thematic funds, the likes of HDFC Innovation Fund, ICICI Prudential Active Momentum Fund, and many others. Then there have been new launches in the mid-cap category, in the multi-cap category. For instance, Bajaj Finserv launched their small-cap fund. Franklin India launched their multi-asset fund. And there have been, others like the multi-asset allocation, category where Franklin launched a fund. So all of it put together has pulled in huge amounts of money. That's point number one. If you look at the next sort of interesting trend, it's investors' love for mid and small caps. And that really illustrates the point. Look at that. Small cap funds drawing in the highest ever inflows of nearly 6,500 crores. That, is huge in comparison to the 2,100 odd crores that large cap funds have garnered. So clearly the market's preference is towards SMIDs, at least the retail investors. Then let's talk about SIPs. Again, a very heartening figure coming through. The SIP trend is rock steady. And this is also a record high. Last month, June, the number was over 27,000 crores. This month, it's almost 28,500 crores. So even as the market has been sluggish, returns have been tough to come by, investors have been keeping the faith. Last but not the least, an interesting sort of perhaps example of how investors are also getting savvier. They're looking at diversification, asset allocation, which is why this category, which is known as the multi-asset category, this is pulling in more and more money almost on a consistent basis. And this time around, if you look at the multi-asset category, then it's garnered almost 6,200 crores, which is a record high for the multi-asset category as well. All put together, a fantastic month, a month of records when it comes to equity inflows coming into mutual funds.
Yes, a record high. Many thanks, Surbhi, for joining us. And speaking of highs, the Dalal Street mania on block deals particularly continues. Private equity giant Warburg has exited Home First Finance, raking in 1,200 crore rupees. Promoters and PEs have sold shares worth $2 billion in the last 4 months alone. Nimesh is here with more on what's buzzing on Dalal Street. Nimesh.
Well, Indian markets have seen clean-out trades worth $2 billion since the April of this year. When I mean clean-out trades, it's essentially the last blocks either from the promoters or from strategic investors. The first example is Home First Finance. We saw a large block today. Warburg Pincus sold its remaining 10.2% stake in a block deal, and they raised close to 1,250 crores. Again, in August of this year, we saw a big block in Eternal, where Ant Financial sold the remaining 2%, and they raised close to 5,650 crores. Again, in July, we saw a large block in Adani Wilmar, where the Adani Group sold nearly 10.2%. It was a clean-out trade, and they raised close to 3,700 crores. In June, we saw a big block in AB Fashion, where Flipkart sold the remaining 6.2% stake, and they raised close to 600 crores. In May, there was a large block in Paytm, where Ant Financial sold its entire 5.8% stake, and they raised close to 4,000 crores. And last but not the least, there was a large block in RBL Bank in April, and there British International sold its entire 3.2% stake, and they raised close to 430 crores. So cumulatively, as I said, $2 billion of clean-out trades have happened since the April of this year. And if investment bankers are to believe, the pipeline seems to be quite strong in the days and months to come.
Nimesh, many thanks. Now, RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra has said that banks can take their own decision on minimum balance for saving accounts. Why did he say this? Because ICICI Bank announced higher minimum balance requirements for new savings accounts with exemptions for salary accounts and pensioners. The governor said that minimum balance is not under any regulatory domain and every bank has its own requirements. Here's the RBI Governor.
ये जो मिनिमम बैलेंस की जो बात है, जो मिनिमम बैलेंस का जो आप बात कर रहे हो, वो उसके अंदर में रिजर्व बैंक ने सभी बैंकों के ऊपर में छोड़ा है कि वो किस प्रकार का मिनिमम बैलेंस वो रखना चाहते हैं। तो अब किसी बैंक ने 10,000 रखा है, किसी ने 2,000, कईयों ने माफ भी किया हुआ है, लेकिन ये रेगुलेटरी डोमेन में नहीं है।
Well, that's the RBI governor saying that the central bank has no role to play. Sources tell CNBC TV18 that the number of accounts that would have to adhere to these minimum balance norms has been historically below 10% of total accounts with ICICI Bank. So how will this impact ICICI Bank's customers, if at all? Ritu's here with more on who's exempt and how other banks compare. Ritu.
Well, this is a clear shift in strategy by ICICI Bank, moving away from mass customers to the relatively more affluent segment by steeply raising the minimum monthly average balance that is required for new savings accounts to the highest that we've seen across any bank in India. We're talking about a 5-fold increase in metro and urban areas to 50,000 rupees. And if this minimum sum is not maintained, there will be a penalty of 6% on the shortfall or 500 rupees, whichever is lower. Now, importantly, this change applies only to new accounts that are opened on or after the 1st of August. So existing customers do not get affected. And also, there are certain accounts which will be exempt from this. So, for instance, all the salary accounts, the pension accounts, basic savings bank deposit accounts, which are no-frill accounts mandated by RBI with a 1 lakh rupee cap on credit, and of course PM Jan Dhan Yojana accounts remain zero balance. Even customers that don't belong to any of these categories, they do have options to avoid keeping 50,000 rupees in their savings bank account. For instance, they could have FDs and RDs with the bank to meet the minimum requirement. Now, while the bank has not officially given any statement explaining the hike, there are various benefits such a move could bring. More stable deposits, improvement in CASA, higher balances at lower savings rates, or more, reduction in cost of funds, more premium cross-selling opportunities, just to name a few. Now, we've heard the RBI governor, ICICI Bank has not broken any rules, but the backlash on social media we've been seeing is understandable because 90% of India makes less than 25,000 rupees a month. And as Chair Kotak points out on X, a 50,000 rupee minimum balance means that 94% of Indians keep all of their monthly income with a bank at all times, or else they face penalties. Now, for perspective, other private banks like HDFC, Axis, Kotak, or Yes, they do require around 10,000 rupees minimum balance in urban areas. And then you have public sector banks like SBI, BOB, Canara, etc. that have a zero minimum balance requirement. So as a customer, you do have various options available, but it will be interesting to see if other private banks also follow suit.
Ritu, many thanks for joining us. A quick check on the commodities market. Oil prices continue to decline after dropping more than 4% last week. There is some optimism over a proposed meeting between the US and Russian presidents and whether that could finally lead to some sort of a breakthrough in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. That is driving prices lower. The meeting between the two presidents also weighing on gold prices. Safe haven demand was dented as investors await crucial US inflation reading also. Now, Prime Minister Modi held a phone call with Ukraine's President Zelensky just days after speaking to the Russian President Putin. Prime Minister Modi has reaffirmed India's consistent position for a peaceful settlement of the conflict. In a social media post, President Zelensky said that they discussed the sanctions against Russia in detail and agreed on a meeting during the UN General Assembly in New York next month. Top government officials have briefed the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs days after the United States hit India with 50% tariffs. President Trump has alleged that India was fueling, and I quote, Moscow's war machine by buying Russian oil. The Indian ambassador to the US, Vinay Quatra, has also spoken to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham as the government attempts an outreach with lawmakers close to the White House. Our colleague Parikshit Luthra is tracking that story. He joins us now. Parikshit, many thanks. Back-channel conversations on an outreach underway. Our ambassador to the US reaching out to Lindsey Graham. He's the man who's really been leading this charge on tariffing countries that have been procuring Russian crude. Take us through where things stand there, and also a significant meeting today of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Parliament. What are you picking up on that?
Well, Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, is an important individual in US politics. He was the one who had sought 100% tariffs on countries like China and India because they buy Russian oil. Now, the meeting between the Indian ambassador and Lindsey Graham comes at a very important time. We're just days away from the Alaska meeting between President Putin and President Trump. And India essentially conveyed its views and perspective on the current India-US energy ties and how they are growing. While immediate details of this meeting were unavailable, we have been given to understand that over the past few days, the Indian government at different levels has conveyed to the United States that our energy trade with the US has gone up by almost 70%. It is going to grow up even further. And this partnership, the India-US energy partnership, is a robust one. At the same time, our oil companies will take their decisions based on market prices and geopolitical reasons as well. The Prime Minister has spoken to both President Putin and also President Zelensky. All eyes on the crucial meeting on the 15th of August between Putin and Trump. At the same time, a very important outreach happening domestically. The Foreign Secretary and the Commerce Secretary briefing parliamentarians. There was a 2.5-hour meeting that took place in Parliament premises in New Delhi. This was to brief parliamentarians on the situation conversation related to the India-US trade tensions. What was the larger message? The larger message was that the overall strategic relationship remains on track despite the trade tensions, and it will not be impacted by this temporary setback. Sources also telling us that both the top secretaries said that they are pursuing negotiations to find a way forward. There have already been 5 rounds of negotiations, and they are positive that there will be more rounds of negotiations to resolve this trade tension between the two sides. The members acknowledged, a couple of MPs that CNBC TV18 spoke to on the condition of anonymity, confirmed that there is an acknowledgement that this situation is very dynamic, very fluid, and difficult to predict where it's going.
Well, we're dealing with President Trump. It's safe to say it is dynamic and unpredictable. Many thanks for joining us, Parikshit. Tesla, meanwhile, has opened its second showroom in India at AeroCity in the national capital. This comes right after it opened its first showroom in Mumbai last month. The 90-day trade truce between the US and China ends tomorrow. Neither country have announced a formal extension yet. China has said that both sides will work towards extending the tariff truce by another 90 days after officials met in Sweden last month. US negotiators have said that the ball is in President Trump's court. Semiconductor makers Nvidia and AMD have agreed to pay the US government a portion of their revenue from China in exchange for export licenses. Both companies will pay the US government 15% of revenue from the sale of their artificial intelligence chips in China. The unprecedented arrangement follows Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang's meeting with the US President Donald Trump. Now, members of the Onion Exporters Association are set to meet Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. Exporters are seeking the government's intervention, saying that they're losing global clients following India's export ban, which was finally lifted in May of last year. Exporters claim that China and Pakistan have increased their global market share while India's onion exports continue to decline. Santya's here with more. Santya, what's the ask?
Right. So it's been 2 years since the central government first imposed restrictions on onion exports, followed by a ban on exports. Onion exporters are still struggling to cope with the damage it caused as they lost several global clients, especially to China and Pakistan, between December 2023 to May 2024, when there was a total ban. Even before this ban was imposed, exports were restricted. As per CRISIL data, before the export restrictions, China's share in the global onion trade was 8% and Pakistan's was only 1%. But once the restrictions were imposed, China's share in the global onion trade increased to 12 to 13% and Pakistan's share rose to 2 to 3%. As per Indian government data, in 2020-21, despite it being the COVID year, India exported over 15 lakh tons of onion. In 2022-23, it exported over 25 lakh tons. This dropped to slightly over 17 lakh tons in 2023-24 once the export restrictions kicked in. As per CRISIL data, this further dropped to just over 11 lakh tons in 2024-25. From more than $600 million in FY22, onion-related exports slowed down to $180 million in FY24 and $230 million in FY25. Exporters say the situation has worsened as Bangladesh has not started importing onion from India this season. Exports to Sri Lanka are impacted as well, attributing this to increased domestic production in these countries. Both Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are important export destinations for India. According to CRISIL, 41% of India's overall onion exports go to Bangladesh and 14% to Sri Lanka. Onion exporters' request seeking tax relief via RoDTEP has been rejected by the government, citing WTO rules.
Santya, many thanks. The Lok Sabha has passed the new income tax bill incorporating key recommendations made by a Parliamentary Select Committee. The legislation is set to replace the 6-decade-old Income Tax Act. The Parliamentary panel submitted a report which runs into more than 4,500 pages. According to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, the new bill has incorporated almost all of the committee's 285 recommendations. Shares of Sun TV rose in trade after the company said all legal notices issued by family members to the promoter have been irrevocably withdrawn. However, the exchange filing did not mention any specific names. Remember, former Union Minister Dayanidhi Maran had sent a notice to his brother Kalanidhi Maran accusing him of engaging in fraudulent practices. But for now, it seems there is truce. The stock up 3%. Larsen & Toubro secured an ultra-mega order from Adani Power to set up 8 thermal power units. The company said each unit will have a capacity of 800 megawatts. L&T did not disclose the order value, but the company classifies ultra-mega order deals worth over 15,000 crores. The Supreme Court has reserved its judgment in the Bhushan Power and Steel insolvency case. Banks are seeking fresh dues worth 6,100 crore rupees from JSW Steel, citing the company's EBITDA. JSW Steel argued that no law provides for flow of earnings, profits from a company that's under insolvency to banks. The Adani Group and Prime Aero have acquired 100% stake in Indamar Technics through a joint venture called Horizon Aero Solutions. This joint venture also owns another maintenance, repair and overhaul company called Airworks. Since Prime Aero is owned by Prajay Patel, who also owns Indamar, this transaction will give Prime Aero part ownership of Airworks in bargain of an equal share of Indamar to Adani Defence and Aerospace. So after airports, Adani is in the MRO space as well. Now, Air India has confirmed it has released interim compensation to 194 families so far, but the total payout could rise. US-based law firm Beasley Allen is now in Ahmedabad to explain legal options to families to pursue claims overseas. Madiha is standing by to explain to us how many families have signed up with this law firm to seek legal remedies outside of India. Madiha.
Right, so more options are opening up for the families of the victims beyond Indian jurisdiction. So far, 194 families have received the 25 lakh rupees interim compensation from Air India. The airline has not disclosed if they are in touch with more families to process the claims. As the 25 lakh amount is only the interim amount, the final insurance payout will be higher once the figure is determined, depending on the financial situation of each family. Then they will also receive 1 crore rupees each from the Tata Sons AI 171 Memorial and Welfare Trust. But the families stand to get more compensation if they win the case as promised by this US law firm Beasley Allen. The firm claims that they have 70 families on board, including victims on the flight and on the ground. The firm's top aviation attorney, Mike Andrews, is in Ahmedabad meeting families and explaining the legal options available. He says they will be seeking access to the aircraft's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder through court orders. The firm says that recordings will help them find out the real cause of the crash. They will pursue legal claims in the United States and the United Kingdom under the Montreal Convention against Air India and product liability claims against the aircraft manufacturer, in this case, Boeing. The legal theories they are exploring involve possible defects in the FADEC and throttle control systems, in short, system failure, and whether Boeing knew about the risks of any malfunction. Mike Andrews says that if evidence points to a manufacturing defect, they will file a product liability claim in the US against Boeing. He argues that the US is the right jurisdiction to fight cases with big multinationals, and since the aircraft was built there, it gives victims a fair chance to demand accountability from a multinational manufacturer. A relative of one victim who has signed a contract with the law firm told CNBC TV 18 that the firm will not charge any fees if they lose this case.
All right. Many thanks, Madiha, for joining us. Up next on India Business Hour, the Supreme Court orders the rounding up of all stray dogs in the National Capital Region, asks them to be moved to shelters within 8 weeks. That and more when we return. And you can catch all of CNBC TV 18's news and updates on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X and Jio Hotstar. The big national story, top opposition leaders, including Lok Sabha leader of the opposition Rahul Gandhi, Samajwadi Party chief Akhilesh Yadav and others, were detained briefly while protesting against the special intensive revision of electoral rolls in Bihar and alleged other electoral malpractices. The opposition lawmakers were leading a march from Parliament House to the Election Commissioner's headquarters. Parliamentarians were stopped midway by the police, including Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge, who sat in on a protest. More than 30 MPs were detained. They were released about 2 hours later.
Actually, बात नहीं कर सकते हैं. Reality ये है, क्योंकि सच्चाई देश के सामने है और ये जो लड़ाई है ये राजनीतिक नहीं है. ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की लड़ाई है. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को बचाने की लड़ाई है. वन मैन वन वोट की लड़ाई है. इसीलिए हमें साफ प्योर वोटर लिस्ट चाहिए.
कांग्रेस पार्टी और अपोजिशन ने बहुत समय बर्बाद कर दिया है. अब हम देश का समय और पार्लियामेंट का समय को और बर्बाद होने नहीं देंगे. जब वो अपना नेता तय नहीं कर पाते हैं, प्रतिनिधि तय नहीं कर पाते हैं, फिर इलेक्शन कमीशन से टाइम मांगा क्यों है?
Well, from one big story to the next, the Supreme Court has issued directions to move stray dogs in the Delhi NCR region to shelters. The court was hearing a suo motu case against increasing incidents of infants and senior citizens falling prey to rabies. The court said that there should be no room for sentiment and that action should be taken against anyone hindering the rounding up of stray dogs, noting that it was progressive. The court has directed the authorities to begin with dog shelters for 5,000 dogs in the next 8 weeks. However, the Supreme Court's order may be tough for implementation. Here's why. The National Capital Region is home to around 10 lakh community dogs, and there is currently no existing capacity for their shelters. Ashmit now joins us to explain where things currently stand, how serious the rabies issue is, moreover, who is responsible for managing the dog population in the NCR. Ashmit, directions coming in there from the Supreme Court, a very sweeping order, but there are practical challenges on the ground. Let's take our viewers through what it will take to actually implement this order.
Well, the numbers are simply not adding up. The first target that the Supreme Court has given in that 6 to 8 weeks is when we need a shelter ready for 5,000 dogs. But the total number of dogs that we have on hand here in Delhi NCR is north of that, is 10 lakh. So while you wrap your head around that number, let's answer some of these interesting questions that have come up. Firstly, the fact that the Supreme Court has taken suo motu cognizance, has shown a sense of urgency, has said that there is no time for sentiment, refused to hear any arguments by animal rights activists, gives the impression that there's an outbreak of rabies as far as our country is concerned. But referring to data that was provided by the government to the Parliament, that data very clearly reveals that there were 54 cases of rabies-related deaths in 2024. Now, while that's tragic, it pales in comparison when you look at student suicide. For perspective, 13,000 a year. Even by strike on account of lightning, that's 2,800 deaths per year. That's just to give you perspective in terms of where rabies stands as a cause of death. Moving forward, where does the responsibility lie? Is this a conflict of law? Now, bear in mind that the Supreme Court order sits in a very interesting position. Interesting why? Is because without striking down the law of the land, it has given directions which are diametrically opposite to the way the situation exists on the ground. Why do we say that? Well, as far as the current regime is concerned, it is governed by the Animal Birth Control Rules, or they otherwise called the ABC rules of 2023. They were notified in 2023. These rules very clearly provide for sterilization, immunization, and even for feeding of dogs. The fact that these directions have been given suggests that they appear to be diametrically opposite to the ABC rules. And also importantly, these rules do not provide for relocation of dogs, especially not en masse. So that begs the question that if not relocation, what's the answer? Well, the answer has been for a very long time. What animal activists have been saying is that there needs to be smart management of the population. But whose job is that? If you find yourself wondering, how did the population grow to 10 lakh? Whose responsibility is that? Who should have been in charge? Well, again, we're referring to a response that was given by the Union government to the Parliament, which very clearly spells out that it's the responsibility of the municipal authorities to be in charge of managing the population of the stray dog population. And here again, the ABC rules come into the picture. The ABC rules, again, they provide for sterilization and immunization of dogs, and that responsibility has been cast on the shoulders of the municipal authorities. So that's as far as who's responsible for the 10 lakh dog population, stray dog population in the national capital. But when we look at what the solutions are, the Apex Court has a very different perspective. The Supreme Court is saying, look, we want to round up all of these dogs and then subsequently put them in dog shelters. But how feasible is that? The reason we're asking the question is because the very first question is, do we even have a dog shelter in Delhi? The short answer, no. The response that fell from the Solicitor General, who was appearing for the Delhi government, very clearly said that there was a process that got started for identification of land, but there was litigation after that. There was a Delhi High Court stay. So the answer is, as of today, there is no dog shelter in the national capital. The answer that the Supreme Court has given is that we're giving you 6 to 8 weeks' time and use that time for constructing a dog shelter for 5,000 people. But one of the biggest dog shelters that is found in Romania houses no more than 3,000 dogs. So that just gives you a sense of perspective, a sense of proportion, that when we're looking at housing these dogs, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 5,000 dogs as one of the world's largest, but here in Delhi, we're looking at over 10 lakh stray dogs. And that's, in fact, one of the questions, Shireen, that a lot of animal activists are asking, that the implementation of this order seems unworkable, seems challenging, and at this point raises very serious questions.
And certainly not in 8 weeks, which is what the Supreme Court has directed as of now. But we will have to wait to see whether there is any process of repeal, of appeal at this point in time. But Ashmit, appreciate you joining us. The Delhi government, of course, has said that they will comply with the Supreme Court order. So we will have to wait to see what that entails. But with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks so much for watching. The news continues right here on CNBC TV 18. Stay tuned. We're back in a moment with more.